From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, The Zoomer with Conrad Black and Denise Donlan.
Tonight we're talking about memory, losing it and improving it, and we've gathered some big brains around the table from science and the arts, so you have the right brains and the left brains today. And Conrad, your conversation today is from London, I understand.
Yes, it is. Charles Moore, authorized biographer of Margaret Thatcher, who died last April.
Well, let's hope his memory serves him well. That's our roundtable discussion today. Memory. Let's tee it up. Memory loss is worrying. We all forget things, names, keys, anniversaries. Or is that only men? Memory loss is normal. What's not normal is dementia. But don't panic. The majority of Canadians over the age of 75, even the forgetful ones, don't have any form of dementia. Our brains are constantly processing, filing, storing, and retrieving short-term memories, long-term memories, and embellished memories. If you do have memory loss, there are things you can do. Less stress, a healthy diet, and being engaged are the big things. Even a positive attitude can help your memory abilities. So the next time you're staring blankly at the floor, wondering why you walked into the room, be positive, and then go and get your gloves out of the fridge. Okay, that happened to me. I did actually put my gloves in the fridge and then couldn't find them.
You know, our memories aren't perfect at any age, but some degree of memory change is certainly a part of normal aging. It's not an entirely bad news story. Some parts of memory get better and some parts do get worse. But certainly our worries and our fears and our thoughts about our memory changes with aging take on more significance, particularly if we get caught up in our own heads worrying about things like Alzheimer's disease and dementia. That can be very scary for people.
The glass is really half full and not half empty, and we know a lot about lifestyle and its impact on memory, and we know that small changes can actually result in large gains as it relates to memory function.
Like what kind of small changes?
Small changes in terms of improving your level of physical activity, making small changes to your diet. They were talking about being engaged. I don't know why it wasn't married, but it really means staying cognitively engaged. So it really is just kind of getting out and sort of embracing life and embracing life in a positive way, and that's going to have a very positive effect on your memory.
Is it a good thing for those of us who are 60 or above that to make a real effort to memorize poems or interesting quotes or excerpts from speeches or something? Is that exercise good for the memory?
Is this fun for you? Do you want to be able to recite poems off the top of your head? If the answers are yes, then it's certainly a good thing. It's a good example of something you can do.
I read psychology.
I'm not that kind of psychologist. Doing things that are interesting and challenging for you in general are, being engaged are good things for your brain. But there's no one magic bullet that science has pulled out as the thing to do.
Yeah, and I think there's other things like learning to play a new musical instrument or learning a new language. There's many ways of keeping our brains sort of stimulated, and it really does come back to the point that what's going to work for you is what you're going to stick to.
But any activity like that is basically a good thing.
Absolutely.
For the memory.
Yeah.
Conrad, you don't have you could pull out the ratio between the debt and the deficit from 1938. You don't have a memory problem.
Not much of one, no.
No?
No.
Any tricks?
No.
Just natural talent?
The only trick I have is if I don't really remember it, I fake it well.
Oh, okay. You just launch into, in 1732.
Yeah.
We're going to play a little game with the audience. True or false? Writing things down makes your memory lazy. Hands up. False. Actually, that is correct. Research shows the opposite. Writing things down enhances your memory, even if you never have the opportunity to review our notes. Okay, question number 2. True or false? Regular sexual activity can improve your memory. True is the answer. Any activity that gets the blood pumping is good for your brain. Your smartphone is making you dumb. Mixed there. The answer is false. There's a lot of learning and problem solving involved in using and integrating all these technologies into our lives. Research tells us that staying active and mentally engaged is good for the brain, as we've heard. As we get older, our memory for things that happened long ago gets more vivid than our memory for things that happened yesterday. Ooh. The audience thinks true. The answer is false. Contrary to popular belief, our memory for things that happened long ago is not as good as often as we say it is. As we get older, our ability to recall specific details of past events declines. But we remember the big part of it, but we start to lose the details, right?
You'll find out tomorrow.
Where you see that is when you write a biography, as I've done. You go around and interview people. Yeah. And they're completely sincere but totally confused.
Right. Or they embellish.
That's one interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they just lie, but you can usually tell lessons.
I have a member of my family who loves to say, do you remember that time? Did I ever tell you about? And then the story gets better and better and better. They're embellishing the story all the time. It wasn't just, I saw the Queen, now I was having tea with the Queen.
Now you are the Queen.
And now we are the Queen. It's true. Okay.
My favorite is carrying the school bus on my back both ways uphill in a snowstorm every day.
You did that?
I did that.
That was after you were born in a log cabin you built with your bare hands.
You had a log cabin? Luxury!
We're going to be back in a second. Right now, here's a clip from a new series on aging called Taking Back the Years, debuting on Vision in June 2014. Stay with us.
It's not very well known, but your brain actually continues to grow and have plasticity associated with it as you age. So exercise can actually help produce new cells in an elderly brain.
So any kind of exercise, doesn't matter what it is, just as long as you're getting the blood flow, the heart rate pumping. And
getting outside and a nice day, having a little walk is probably one of the best things you can do for your brain.
Howard, you're 92. You're still at it. You've been doing this for 71 years.
Next month.
93 next month.
What is your secret?
Well, I guess good genes and looking after myself and lots of upper body. My legs, my knees have gone, so I conduct sitting down. But I've been doing it for 70 years.
Yes.
And like most times, it's 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and a performance at night.
Now, do you do it all for memory, or do you read music ever?
I read music only because I write most of it, so I know it, but I have to have numbers, because the musicians are slow. 81. What did you say? 81. But so I need numbers for rehearsal, but I don't use music in the concert.
Music was my reason for dancing in the first place when I was 4. It was the music that I had to respond to. And all through my career, it was the music that became my guide and my inspiration, and also for those steps. If I had to learn a ballet that had no music with contemporary choreographers, I had trouble. But the minute I had music, then every step just flowed. Now that's me. I watched dancers, though, before the curtain, going over things and not remembering. And so that, for me, this was my trick, my secret.
For an actor to learn, for me anyway, I don't know about anybody else, everybody has their own technique. Like Rob Morrow, for instance, a friend of mine, he looks at a blank wall. He had one of these apartment walls painted white, and he stared at that while he was trying to memorize these lines. I read the whole thing, read the scene first, then I sort of forget what everybody else is saying, then I read my lines, and just brush over. It's like painting. You just put your base on, you understand what the scene's about, then you start adding the color, you find a different words which match, like a little map, like numbers, like connecting the dots all the way through.
So there's science there because you're actually pulling from different parts of the brain, right?
What I hear are themes of, connecting new information to information you already know. It's your semantic memory for things you just know stays very stable. And so if you can connect new things to it, it's easier to hold on to those new pieces of information.
My best practice technique was to do it in bed. I would basically do the entire play in bed.
Sex is better for your memory.
Some of us practice our whole lives in bed.
That's right. No, that would have been even better.
Well,
So how do you do that in bed?
I would just lie back and I'd start, and I was really nervous before the first performance, so I couldn't stop, and so to just lie there and fret didn't work. So I said, I'm going to do this, and so I was, one night, and I just went through the entire thing, and it was great. And then I figured I can only do it in bed. And then, and that was a problem, but it really seemed to help.
Making associations is a very powerful memory strategy. And so we could, open up to the table. What does the name Denise bring up for you? Do you have any connections or associations, or in the audience as well? Anyone?
I generally
Bad knees. Yep.
I introduce them to my wife first. This is my wife, and
right. That's
I wait for them to say their name and go, oh yeah.
The third strategy is the spousal support memory system, but that's not on the table.
But the other thing that Jay said that I'd love to know whether it's true is that your brain can continue. He does it in bed, and then surely your brain helps you remember while you're sleeping.
Sleep is very, very important for memory.
Yeah, but does it actually work on memorizing what you've just sort of said to yourself, I need to memorize this, and then you say it out loud? Did you say it out loud?
I said it out loud,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I felt, and as you say about sleeping also, I felt really relaxed.
The process that's going on during sleep is something that we call consolidation, and so that kind of more helps us hardwire that memory so that we can access it. And if you don't get good sleep, then you don't get that consolidation, and you when you're trying to find, you're sort of going through that process of I know that, but you can't find it.
But his ability to recall it while awake, but lying down, is the same principle why psychoanalysts ask people to lie down, isn't it? Because they're focused entirely on trying to say what they're conscious of and not worrying about standing up or moving around.
That's interesting.
As an actor, if you have to do the same thing, I'll do the same thing in bed, but I have to have my text right there, because if I forget a passage and I memorize it wrong or think I know what I'm talking about, then it comes out and it stays that way. But then you get up on your feet and you talk to somebody who in the scene you can't remember a bloody thing. You fight your way through the whole scene until it's over after doing it 5-6 times this way with the camera, 5-6 times this way with the camera. Then you walk away from that scene, you can't get it out of your head.
Right. And
Now,
you're
Graham,
yelling,
when you do
line.
it wrong, do you punish yourself somehow? Do you slap yourself?
No, I generally go and have an ice cream cone or something.
I think the number is 35% of Canadians over the age of 85 have dementia, and as you get to 90, it starts to get very, very high. And yet we have the boomers are growing in large numbers towards this, and Canada is still the only G8 country that doesn't have a national dementia policy. Where are we going to put our money? Where are we going to put our resources? How are we going to structure ourselves around it? Particularly as the science goes from how to cope to how to prevent.
Over the next 30 years or so, dementia is going to cost us about $800 billion. That's Canada alone, $800 billion problem. And those same people tell us that if we can delay the onset of symptoms by 2 years, we can save ourselves $219 billion over that same period of time.
Well, there are tools now, right, to try and identify if it's normal memory loss or when you should see a doctor. What are you doing at Cognicity?
We're taking the science in Baycrest and other terrific healthcare institutions, and we're trying to take that science out of the labs and bring it to the world. If we can capture people at the pre-symptom stage, at the earliest stages, we can do, we think, for the world of memory, the same sort of wonderful things that cardiovascular folks have done, right? Earlier diagnosis, earlier treatment, more effective treatment, and we think that we can probably extend healthy life, productive life by years, and so we haven't effected a cure. But if it's your years, or if it's your parents' years, we've given a great gift in the process.
So how do you circulate an early diagnosis test without exacerbating how nervous people are, which in turn can make them even more more prone to be forgetful or to be paranoid.
It's not a brain game, but it's an assessment. And it's clinically validated, and you're going to take it in the privacy of your own home, on your own time, without the world watching you and causing the stresses that maybe a doctor could cause.
Okay, well, I'm stressed right now because if we don't go to a commercial break, something's going to fall out of the sky.
So she's going for a walk.
Going for a walk. When we come back, Jay Title with a performance piece from a play and now a one-man show called Alzheimer That Ends-heimer. Don't go away.
When it came to memory and the dreaded loss of memory, my father, who was the fastest and wittiest guy I've ever met, invariably used humor to save himself. He was like a stand-up comic escape artist par excellence. Take, for instance, the third or fourth time his geriatric psychiatrist, a lovely guy named Stu Druckerman, gave him the MMSE, which is the mini mental state examination for determining cognitive function. The first few questions are temporal and spatial. What's the season, what's the year, what's the building we're in called? My father, by this time, had no interest in doing the test at all. He had no patience for it. Who likes to do a test, after all, when you don't know the answers? Then the doctor got to question number 5, which was a task-oriented question. Mr. Title, he said, please take this pencil and piece of paper and write a sentence on it. A sentence, said my father. A sentence, said the doctor. So my father took the pencil and paper and wrote his answer on the paper, which was 25 years. He took the paper and handed it to Dr. Druckerman. Dr. Druckerman looked down at the paper, looked up at him, and he said, Mr. Title, 25 years, I'm sorry, this isn't a sentence. And a smile came to my father's face for the first time that day, a particular type of smile. It's the kind of sentence, he said, you should get for asking me stupid questions like these. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you, Jay.
We just found out a few minutes ago that I was in the same class as his father.
Really?
At Parkville Collegiate. And I said, I know there are not too many titles around, but was your father in Parkdale? He said, of course.
You just lost
Same
your
age.
dad. We're
Just
sorry.
a month ago, yeah.
Yeah. And when we come back, we're going to talk to, we're going to give you some foodie advice from Dr. Carroll that's going to help you improve your memory now. Great. Dr. Carol Greenwood at Baycrest, where she has a PhD in nutrition, and she's written this fabulous book called Mindful, which is full of recipes that are good for your brain.
Yes. The main message is when we're talking about what do Canadians need to do. I mean, one is Canadians need to focus on eating more fruits and vegetables. But I think it's really important to focus on eating variety and not trying to find a superfood. We know that superfoods don't exist. We have no evidence for it.
Really? Is that why every day there's a new survey coming out saying today caffeine good, tomorrow caffeine bad, today wine good, tomorrow wine bad?
Absolutely, and it's making Canadians frightened to know what to put in their mouths. Whereas if you stand back and you look at where our evidence is, we don't have any human-based evidence for that. And so really what we're trying to communicate in the book is the science of the evidence that we do have, what do we know, and that the evidence is really arguing towards a Mediterranean-style diet. And it really relates to the types of things we were talking about today in terms of helping us retain our cognitive function as we age. So trying to increase our consumption of grains and beans. And so Daphne Rabinovitz, who was the recipe developer, just put together some beautiful recipes on this. I wrote the science. Daphne really has responsibility for the recipes. And really this is just a fabulous recipe, and it's kind of based on a whole bunch of healthy foods like wheat berries that you put in, boiling. All of these things take different times, but you put in lentils a little bit later. So it's a one-pot wonder. You end up with a little bit of orzo pasta, And then just before you come to the end of your cooking time, you throw in some currants to help plump them up. So you can spend your day sort of just having your timer, sort of coming back every once in a while to pick it up.
Every 20 minutes,
Absolutely.
put something else in there.
And then
yeah.
presto,
Ta-da!
yes,
Very
with
good.
the magnificent magic of television, we kind of end up with all of this cooked. And then really it's just putting in some really colorful, healthy ingredients.
So what's good for your body is good for your brain. Is that the
what's
essential?
Good for your heart is good for your brain is the really essential one to remember. So here we have some mango and some red pepper. So you're wanting to go into those bright red colors. We've also got some green onion on here. And I'll mix that up if you want to take a little bit of her wonderful kind of curry-based dressing. And that can just get
It looks fairly it's an inexpensive meal.
It's inexpensive,
too.
it's easy. You know, other than the fact that it takes a little bit of time, but it's not time where you're in the kitchen.
It keeps for a few days, I would imagine, too,
keeps for
right?
a couple of days. It's fabulous in terms of taking to work.
Good potluck thing.
We can always add, perfect for potluck. A little bit of salt and pepper. And mix that up in presto, and you just have this wonderful, colorful, tasty salad.
Looks fantastic.
A piece of what we're doing is trying to teach people what to do sort of in that long-term health piece, the prevention piece.
Right.
But the other piece that we try to talk about is what can I do today?
What can I do today?
What can I do today that's going to help me today, and I'm going to be aware of it. And that really comes from part of the perspective is understanding that our memories do change, and our peak time of day for memory function changes. So when we're young, our peak time tends to be in the afternoon, but as we age, our peak time in terms of memory function is in the morning. If you're an older executive, you're having to have a meeting, and you have all of this youth that are scrambling for your job.
Darn youth.
Schedule it in the morning.
Well, what's that old quote? Age and treachery will always overcome youth and skill.
Exactly.
So big top tip for mindful eating?
I think it really is think Mediterranean style, that we really need to get away from the things that we know we need to get away from, the highly processed foods. Turn to your fruits and vegetables. I always jokingly say as you do that, Mediterranean style allows you to have wine, so as you're making these changes,
wine is good for your brain.
Wine is good for your brain.
Repeat after me, Carol. Wine is good for your brain. Okay, we're going to have some of this beautiful salad for the audience.
We do.
And we're going to put that recipe up online so you can get it yourself. I've already downloaded it myself. And thank you, Carol.
Perfect.
We're going to join you back at the table then.
Thank you.
All right, eat up. Good brain health. We'll be back in a second.
There are tons of things you can do at this time of year to keep your thumb green and prep for next season. What are you working on over here, Charlie?
Darren, for garlic lovers, now is the time to plant. Notice what I've got, a nice fat, juicy bulb. This is not a Chinese bulb because those ones have been irradiated to keep them from growing when they travel all the way from China. So this is a locally grown bulb. Break it apart, make sure the nice little paper, it's called a tunic, stays intact, and then we just pop it into the ground, pointy end up, down about 2 inches, and this will grow up, beautiful green plant. Next July, come back, we'll harvest them. Then in August, once they've dried down a bit, we will cook something amazing with this delicious garlic. Rule number 1, never rake leaves on a windy, wet day. However, these leaves are perfect. They're full of all kinds of good nutrient. They're 100% organic. I'm not sending them to the landfill. I'm keeping them on the property. My mulching lawnmower is going to chew them all up, put them in the garden. The worms love them, the plants love them, and they improve my clay soil. All right, Darren, this is a project everybody can do. From my front door, I've removed a pot that did have geraniums in it, and they obviously died in the frost. It is a frost-proof pot, so now I'm going to turn it into a seasonal planter. I've picked up some boughs. I've got some nice white pine. I've got some fir, a little bit of shiny magnolia.
Very nice.
And over here we have some nice green cedar from the West Coast, and then these yellow twigs are dogwood.
For more great gardening tips, don't miss Charlie's radio show that's Saturday mornings on the new AM 740. In Toronto, I'm Darren Maharaj for The Zoomer.
One of the reasons I find it so interesting to write this book is that she's a sort of mythological character. She's going to go on being in the mind of the world for hundreds of years, and people will say, oh, she's a real Mrs. Thatcher, or are you going to do a Thatcher?
There's no applause at the moment because we're all eating. You know, it's a great show to come down to, right? You get a little wine, you get some food, you get to hang a pitted prune. So Veronica, when you're speaking, for example, what are the tricks you use to? Because you write your notes and then you're extemporaneous.
Yeah,
right?
but what I do is rewrite them, and I do work with a computer. I do it in 24 or even 36 font, bold.
That's big.
And then I repeat it sentence by sentence 9 times. And I say it out loud because it's the oral memory as well as the visual memory. And then often when I'm up there, well, hopefully the result is, and it has happened most of the time, I can see it in my mind. And I can hear myself as I say it. So that's like a trick that I have for memorizing passages of text.
Conrad, you've seen some amazing speakers in your time. Anything that comes to mind about people? I mean, I've seen Bill Clinton is brilliant at it. Bobby Kennedy Jr., brilliant at it.
Well, the people you just mentioned are extremely fluent. They never, and I have great admiration for Bill Clinton, but I never found him to be all that overpoweringly eloquent. I mean, not like listening to Martin Luther King or at his best Ronald Reagan or something. I mean, whether you agree with the content isn't the point. They were wonderful speakers. And I often memorize lots of things that I read or hear and then repeat them to myself. And if they slip after a while, and I wait, I work at them until I get them back. Now, that's why I asked earlier. I don't know if that actually does my memory any good, but psychologically does me good to be able to remember it.
Obama's a great speaker.
He's fluent. He's fluent. Not one thing he said in his public career is memorable.
Not one thing?
No, not a thing.
So you think
it's not like, ask not what you can do for, or your country can do for you, or, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Nothing like that.
What about hope and change? I was kind of motivated by those things.
Hope and change? Yeah, well.
Your conversation this week is with Margaret Thatcher's biographer, Charles Moore. And I understand he was chosen by the family to write the biography, but then asked not to publish it until she had passed. Is that true?
Yeah, he was chosen by her. And I may say, I engaged him as the editor of the Daily Telegraph because Mrs. Thatcher advised me to do that. And I was torn between 3 candidates, and she said I would have Charles Moore. And he was a very good editor, and he's a very elegant writer. It's a lovely book.
Well, here is an excerpt from that interview, and it starts with her election as Prime Minister.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
Have your views of her changed at all as a result of again, something I have some familiarity with, the process of getting so intensively familiar with her through archives and interviews?
No, because she's a very consistent person. But there are 2 important things that I really entered my mind much more strongly from all the study. The first is that though she said she was a conviction politician, and obviously she was also extremely cunning. You don't do politics so successfully for so long without knowing when to do something and when not to do it. And she was very, very pragmatic in that sense.
Charles, there were times when it was a novelty and a handicap to be a woman, when she actually used it to her advantage, and in a very cunning and sometimes entertaining way. Do any examples come to mind?
That's completely right. I think she saw that the way to deal with her unique quality was to make it a maximum advantage rather than to ignore it. When she stood against Ted Heath to try and become leader of her party, somebody a Heathite dug up an interview she'd given where she said that because of inflation she bought lots of household goods when she didn't need them because the price would rise. And the Heath people accused her of being a hoarder, which, in those days with the wartime memories was a terrible antisocial thing to be. And her campaign people all said, this is terrible, you've got to move on from this. And she said, no, wait a moment, I'm not a hoarder. I'm a prudent housewife, and I'm going to tell the world about this. And she said to the press, come into my larder. So you have this marvellous picture of her opening the cupboard, and there are all these tins of, tongue and ham and tinned peaches and all the rather horrible things people had to eat in the 1970s. And she said, look, is this the act of a hoarder? No, this is somebody who actually, as women all over the country have to do, has to manage a household budget in a time of inflation. It's the men with all their false expertise who've got all this wrong and are making this country poorer. And I know what I'm talking about because I go out and buy these things, and here they are. And it turned the table on the whole, and everything about her economic arguments were like that. They were about how
domestic economy.
Yeah. One of the very interesting things about the Reagan-Thatcher relationship was precisely because it was so good that it could endure quite a few quite surprising bumps along the way. The biggest, of course, being, which more than a bump actually, was that they fundamentally disagreed about nuclear weapons, because Reagan did think you could rid the earth of nuclear weapons, and she jolly well didn't.
Now, those of us who followed him fairly closely are not convinced he really did believe it.
Well,
he certainly put up a spirited claim that he did.
I think, of course, he was talking in a visionary way, not in an immediately practical way. And this is an interesting example of how what looked like it was in some ways a fundamental disagreement, could be used quite creatively, because she would sort of keep him on line about the importance of deterrent, but then she would also help him on the SDI issue, where all the other Europeans were being incredibly difficult. And I think the thing that was very important there as well was Mrs. Thatcher and Gorbachev and Reagan, because it was Mrs. Thatcher who first cottoned on to the idea of Gorbachev, and then she immediately went in late 1984 to sell it to Reagan. I mean, almost literally, I think it was 5 days later, she went to see him. And that's an interesting example of the relationship working, because he trusted her so much on this vital Cold War issue, he would listen to her on let's have a look at Gorbachev in a way that he wouldn't have listened to any other European. It's an interesting thing, that friendship, one reason it was strong was that it was formed in adversity, because they first met when she'd only just become Conservative leader, and he was in the wilderness. It was after...
but he was coming. You could see him coming.
Well, the following year, it was 1975 they met, and he failed to get the nomination in 76. So
he really shook an incumbent president, though. He almost took it.
Yeah, but still. And an interesting thing I discovered when writing Volume 1 was that when she won the general election in May 1979, which of course before he became president, he telephoned Number 10 to congratulate her on the day, and they wouldn't put him through because they considered him a person of no importance. And
but the switchboard did that?
Yeah. And Mrs. Thatcher didn't discover this, but luckily he also, instead of being offended, sent her a letter, and she immediately rang him up, and all was well about 3 days later. But it shows how things change.
From my observations, would be nothing like as well informed as yours. The greatest difficulty she had of that kind of thing was when the Americans occupied Grenada.
Very much, yeah.
And she was convinced that it was a complete fraud, and they only did it to distract American voters' attention from the debacle in Beirut, where they lost, I think, 200 Marines in that bombing. But she explained it to me that when she accused Reagan of this, he didn't say yes and didn't say no, but made a sort of humorous comment about how she had been longer in her job than he had in his, and she must know at least as well as he did that sometimes you had to change the subject.
Yeah.
We are here because for the first time for many years, British sovereign territory has been invaded by a foreign power. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the whole House will join me in condemning totally this unprovoked aggression by the government of Argentina against British territory.
Do you think there was a substantial phenomenon of close colleagues of hers who thought that she would not succeed in the Falklands War, and they certainly wouldn't wish ill upon British armed forces engaging an enemy, that they would be distinctly consolable if it wasn't a success because they could give her the high jump?
I think that's right. I've no evidence of any plot about that, but I think that's right. Remember that the year before, a lot of them had been completely against her economic policy and had wanted her out. They'd failed to get her out. They were still against the economic policy. The economic results were already beginning to look a bit better by March 1982, but she was still in a difficult electoral situation. And then along comes this crisis. And of course, for people who didn't like her in her party, this could have been the moment. I mean, if she'd lost the Falklands War or had to settle with an unhappy compromise, that would have been the end of her. And of course, no one knew that better than she.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're leaving Downing Street for the last time after 11 and a half wonderful years, and we're very happy that we leave the United Kingdom in a very, very much better state than when we came here 11 and a half years ago.
Looking from the perspective that you uniquely have, how do you reckon she stands comparative to other prominent prime ministers in British history?
I think she does stand very high because she had this capacity to innovate and to lead and to communicate the message the whole time. I mean, it's extraordinarily powerful, the combination of the political and economic principles and the sort of force of personality, so that she's recognised all over the world. And in that, one of the reasons I find it so interesting to write this book is that I see her, she's a sort of mythological character. She's going to go on being in the mind of the world for hundreds of years, and people will say, oh, she's a real Mrs. Thatcher, or are you going to do a Thatcher? Or, and it's that combination of personality, principle and policies which is unique.
Thank you for joining us, Charles. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you, Conrad.
Yeah, and she does live on in the minds. You were invited to her funeral.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there was...
she came to our wedding, and she sponsored me as a member of the House of Lords.
Of course. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Zoos must not simply be cages for desperately cramped and lonely animals. They must be elaborately spacious and lifelike, and they must be regional or even national.
Join the conversation online through our website, Twitter, and Facebook. In this week's poll, we're asking, are religions responsible for their fanatics?
The recent departure of the last elephants of the Toronto Zoo to an elephant shelter in California, following the premature death of 4 elephants in 4 years in that zoo, highlights the scandalous condition of many zoos and the continuing mistreatment of exotic animals. Elephants are magnificent animals, the largest land creatures, with prodigious memories and very long lives, and no natural enemies. They have admirable habits and are matriarchal, but they are tortured by circuses to stand on one foot or on a small drum, and in zoos are often in inhospitable climates, on hard surfaces that give them arthritis, and are chronically lonely. Great cats and bears are often too confined, and the whole concept of the zoo, now that everyone can see these animals in vivid detail on television, has to be rethought. The continued massacre of animals by poachers seeking ivory tusks and tiger balm and so forth requires the Western world to provide sanctuaries for endangered species. Zoos must not simply be cages for desperately cramped and lonely animals. They must be elaborately spacious and lifelike, and they must be regional or even national. Instead of inferior and underfunded zoos in many cities, we should have a very few properly funded and models of veterinary and zoological research for the world that whole families and school classes will travel hundreds of miles to see. The Toronto Zoo is now underfunded, understocked, inadequate, and an embarrassment. Toronto must do better. I'm for a small tax on condos for the benefit of the lions, tigers, and their fellow residents.
I thought your people didn't go for new taxes.
I don't know what you mean by my people. I'm all for the government paying its bills, but I'm not so enthused about the more extravagant versions of simply taking money from people who've earned it and giving it to people who haven't in exchange for their votes. I don't think that is so good, but you've got to tax somewhere,
Well, I think those
I'd rather give the money to lions and tigers than some recipients.
Oh dear.
And bears? Oh my.
And bears. I
And
think those
bears,
elephants
yeah.
have it pretty good, though. I understand they have a therapeutic jacuzzi down there where they've gone.
In California.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And they have excellent memory, elephants. Is that true?
but look here, this is a zoo. What kind of a zoo in a serious city has no elephants? I mean, we should have elephants. But we've got to take care of them properly.
So
you can't
you
just
want-
put them in a telephone box. You've got to take care of them properly.
So you want less zoos that are better managed with the money
I
from a
don't think we
tax
can
on
have
condos.
an inordinate amount of money spent on zoos, but the ones we have should be commodious for the animals, interesting for the people. I mean, look, I don't want to criticize the personnel at the Toronto Zoo. I spoke to the director. They all do their best. It's not a rap on anyone as an individual, but we only, as far as I can see, there are only about 30 animals there. And the tigers and the lions look healthy. I mean, they don't look like mangy animals. They're splendid cats. But the confined spaces are much too small.
Well, hopefully the zoos that do exist around the world, I agree. Sometimes it just makes your heart hurt when you look at how the animals are being taken care of. On the other hand, the science of how to deal with animals and hopefully how to prolong the number of species we have on the earth is something that we can glean from the few that are in captivity and help us steward the earth a little bit better than we are right now. Next week on the show, you can expect a very animated discussion around the table. We're assembling some experts to talk about assisted suicide. So I'll see you next week. Let's zoom out.